Let's Talk JMMA with Charlie Jewett from sogo-kaku.com. This is a podcast about the deep end of Japanese combat sports scene. I'm your host, Shu Hirata from On the Road Management. Now, let's begin. Hey, good morning, Charlie.
Good evening. How you doing, Shu?
Good. So, and good evening to everybody in the States and good morning to everybody in Asia. Let's talk about the biggest loss for the Japanese fans. It happened on last night, which is Bellator 279. Horiguchi,
Right.
Patrick Mix.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Just like a general depression went over the Japanese fans.
Oh yeah, I know, because I realized that before any fights, it seems like all these Japanese fans get into arguments and fights, right? Mm-hmm. Who is better? Who is this and that? Who may sell more tickets? Blah blah blah. But when it comes to Horiguchi, it seems like every fight, Japanese fans gets together and cheer for this guy, right?
Yeah, well, they were kind of they hold him up. I mean, the Japanese commentators were kind of calling him like the greatest Japanese mixed martial artist of all time. Mm-hmm. He's kind of been elevated to this really high position. Right. So they expect him to go beat foreign talent. And when he beat Darren Caldwell, it kind of validated a lot of that. But I think Caldwell kind of fought a stupid fight against Horiguchi, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to have a hard time in Bellator at 135. I mean, Mix looked like a giant against him.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's obvious. I know. I think we all knew that Horiguchi is a flyweight to begin with, anyway. Right. And he's very short, and of course, his heydays in UFC was in UFC at that 125. So, but I think at this point he's at the Bellator where there's no flyweight division, and considering his age, right? I think his way is trying to get that title again in Bellator, and hopefully he can a couple times. And maybe hopefully got a big deal to go back to the UFC, right? Like a Michael Chandler route, I guess. Mm-hmm. I mean, what else can you do at this point,
Yeah. I mean, I thought the Sergio Pettis loss wasn't that bad because I think he's winning most of that fight.
Well, yeah, exactly, right.
With this fight, it seemed, I mean, Mix was just so tall. He was able to like wrap his legs around and get that lockdown position. And it seemed like Horiguchi didn't really have an answer for it.
No. And I thought there was a similarity between how Sergio fought and also how Mix fought, in a sense that they both took the center of the cage. Mm-hmm. And they pressured Horiguchi by the positioning instead of just throwing a lot of jabs or any of that, Yeah. So they basically kind of made, Horiguchi goes around. And when Horiguchi comes in, it's sort of like wait for the counter shot,
Right. Well, and also it just seemed like it looked like Mix was trying to time knees a lot to hit Horiguchi when he was coming in.
Right.
And it seems like everybody is just working on countering him because they know he does that dash in.
Right.
So they're all just waiting for him to dash in and hoping to hit him when he comes in.
Exactly. And no sense try to engage in striking battle to try to compete on his speed, right?
Right. Now, it was a weird fight, though, because Mix didn't look great in it to me either, because his only real offense was just getting on Horiguchi's back
and throw those right punches. Right.
Because when it was mainly striking, it looked like Horiguchi was still, despite the massive height difference and reach difference, was still getting the better of the striking exchanges.
Mm-hmm. He was landing more significant strikes.
Yeah. He cut Horiguchi in the eye. I mean, he was cut as well, but it was a weird fight for both of them, I think.
Well, I think today's unified rules, you're supposed to give 10-9 if you really win by even small edge, which means they actually encourage him to put 10-8 if he gets dominant, round. So I think they should have given Mix a 10-8,
Oh, yeah, I saw that John McCarthy, unofficial scorecard, scored the first one at 10-8. Yeah, I assumed it was a 10-8.
Right, but all three judges score 10-9. And what actually bothered me was all three judges score a third round to the Mix 10-9 too, because that's the round I thought it was given to. It could have gone to Horiguchi, either way.
Right.
No.
Yeah, because I thought going into the last round, we were looking at a possible draw.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I thought there was a possibility of a draw if it was a 10-8. Yeah. Who knows? Horiguchi, but now that frees Horiguchi up probably to fight in RIZIN if he wants. Maybe he can.
Well, I think Scott Coker made it public that the next Horiguchi fight is going to be a Bellator Japan 2 show in December.
All right. So, well, then,
so which means actually it's good for Horiguchi that he's taking an 8-month break. He needs that, you know.
Well, I thought he needed a break anyway after the bad KO loss. I thought he was
exactly right. So he accommodated the Bellator schedule, so he deserves to take a break, you know, and get back into this Japan show, which is great.
Yeah.
You know? The question is, who is he going to fight?
It's worth remembering, too. He's only 31 years old. So it's interesting to see how he comes back from this. But is this the first time in his career he's lost twice in a row? It might be.
Probably, yeah. I think so, you know.
It'll be interesting to see how he bounces back from that.
Right. And more than anything, the loss against Sergio was the hit to the head. You know, strikes to the head.
Well,
not like that. It's just a little different, you know.
He didn't take any significant damage at all in the mixed fight. The damage.
No, exactly. So I actually personally like. All right, sure. He had no answers to Mix's favorite offensive move, which is a get on his back and body lock and control the position. Sure, but other than that, I think Horiguchi wasn't that bad at all. You know.
No. Well, I mean, it looked like he was doing the right thing. Like whenever Horiguchi would lock his foot behind his knee, Horiguchi would roll to that side. It was just that Mix would just switch it immediately. So. Right. Outside of that, he didn't really have an answer for getting his legs off of him.
No, exactly. So it's too bad, you know.
I mean, the Bellator champion lost the same day. So I mean, the division's kind of chaos in Bellator, much like in RIZIN. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Exactly, and you know, I'm going to mention a little bit, but one championship happened, and Miura lost. You know, Saito lost. All these guys lost now. You know. Horiguchi lost. So in terms of record of Japanese versus the world for the last 15, 16 fights also, it's been pretty bad, you know?
Yeah, well, maybe the Japanese can claim on to, was it Yamauchi and Inaba at Bellator, like adopt the foreign-born Japanese fighters.
Yeah, but, you know, exactly so. But I'm really concerned now that maybe we will see a day that there will be no Japanese fighters in UFC.
Yeah. Well, the Miura fight was weird because her shoulder popped out of its socket. It was more of like an injury stoppage.
Right. But also before that, we all had a high hope for Yuya Wakamatsu for the one title fight, which he didn't win. You know, like, you know, I think all the Japanese diehard MMA fans being devastated these days. You know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. Let me think. But there's some up and coming talent. I mean, I think the new generation is looking pretty good. I think new crop is coming up that's going to look. I mean, Seika Izawa for one looks like she can be very good.
Well, here's what it is. So let's talk about new crop because I think there's somebody we have to mention, which is a person named Rinya Nakamura who beat Ariando Caetano, which is a 35 veteran Shooter Brazil champion on his just third pro fight. And he was a world cadet champion, so his base is wrestling. And anybody who saw that fight last night, it's obvious that Rinya is up there. It's a very impressive performance, and I think he has to be one of the best-looking talent.
Well, he mentioned he wants to fight in the UFC in his post-fight speech, I believe. So,
exactly. So I think I know for the fact Sean Shelby is looking at that show. So we'll see. Even though it was 3 third wins, beating Caetano is super impressive. You know, Caetano is like a little like before contender series kind of talent. So if Sean likes it, maybe there's a possibility that Nakamura will end up in this UFC Asia tournament.
Yeah, they announced that. That's a good point.
Right.
Storm was kind of an interesting show though, because they had the music acts. It was kind of like what Thriller wanted to be. They had a music act between most of the fights.
Yeah. I mean, the Pound Storm, I think personally, from English, you know, the audience point of view, it's not one of the best names, you know, Pound Storm. But for those listeners, our audience who doesn't know about this show, it is run by an entertainment company called LDH and also Abema TV. So LDH is very known in the Japanese society for entertainment company that has many dancers / artists, you know, singers, that type of stuff. So on this show, every fight on the entrance, they had the LDH artists playing, right, performing, you know.
Right.
And it was very interesting. They did have some of the very top level artists too, and a guitar guy named like Miyabi, which is considered to be like a real good up and coming, the best guitarist in Japan kind of stuff. So, and I heard that it was about 5,000 people attended in this show, and about 80% of the audience were female.
Right.
Which is very, very interesting, you know?
Well, I think it's interesting because, I mean, I think Japanese fight events tend to have more women in general than Western shows.
Sure, right.
Like when I go to Deep or RIZIN shows, there's usually, I would say it's almost like a 50-50 breakdown. But 80%, that's kind of an insanely high number. It's interesting.
It is, which means majority of the audience were not MMA fans. They were those LDH artists, you know. They were there because most of the people bought the tickets through fan club membership, all kinds of stuff. But at the same time, I did see that many audience also enjoy the MMA fights. So that may be a pretty good way to, you know, attract new, you know, fans. And both LDH and ABEMA TV is huge. They're big companies, so they have a, you know, resources to keep it going for 10 years if they want to.
So, we got a comment. Do you think Nakamura will be on the road to UFC tournament or like a contender series situation?
I think he should be on the UFC Asia tournament, which is, I think, starting on June. And
is that the 8-person tournament they're doing?
I think so. That's what I'm hearing. And I also hear that you know, they were supposed to announce some of the, you know, confirmed fighters. You know, they had to postpone that announcement a few times. I think it's a sign that maybe they're not really having an easy time, you know, confirming many top level fighters. So I think there's still a chance for Nakamura to get in.
Okay.
You know, however, by looking at that performance, I don't know. He may be ready for just the regular UFC fights to begin with. So maybe he doesn't even have to go for the Asia tournament. Why, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. There's a guy like Mokaev who went there for 5-0 record. So he's what, 3-0? Oh, that's okay. You know, I mean, if he's a good-looking talent and he's got a very good background, you know, as a wrestler, so you know.
Unfortunately, you're one of the guys who were behind Patrick Usami lost, but he's such a high-level boxer. You got to think that he can bounce back from this, right?
I think his physical talent and his boxing skills are amazing. But in terms of techniques of both striking and both ground, he still have a lot to learn. So I don't think we should rush him to put him against the top league. You know?
Well, this fight, that's what I was going to say. This fight felt almost a little bit rushed, where they wanted to book all these guys against international talent in the main event.
Well, here's what it is, though. But in terms of Patrick Usami, if he stepped on his gas on the third round, he could have won that fight.
Yeah.
But instead, he kind of showboated, and I think he kind of played to the fans. And he was smiling during the third round and stuff. And I know for the fact that some of the executives of the promotion side did not like that. So I'm pretty sure he got lectured a lot after the fight. But I agree with that, because if he really went for the kill, he could have won that fight. You know.
Interesting.
Yeah, so no, which means I'm telling you right now, is very, very good looking talents are coming out of this show, Dreamers. You know, there are very couple, you know, fighters. It looks very interesting, you know. So you know, they might produce top guns from Japan, you know.
That was interesting because I was looking at the results, and Nakamura actually said he felt a lot of pressure to win because a lot of people that are part of this kind of Pound Storm and Dreamers train at this gym called Exfights.
Right.
And Nakamura was the only one to win at the event. He felt a lot of pressure to win for the gym. And it's kind of interesting because it's nice to see like a new gym kind of emerging.
Yeah.
Because all of their opponents, besides the foreign talent, were like Tribe Tokyo, Three Chonen, or they're like Kenji Osawa students, or they're Kitaoka students. So it'll be interesting to kind of watch these and see if they can catch up, and when they catch up, like if they surpass them or not.
Now, just to, you know, I mean, you know this, but all these, the audience out there that was listening to this show, that Exfights is a gym actually owned by LDH. And it's run by two very known fighter in the U.S. also, is a guy named Mr. Takaya, Hiroyuki Takaya, who fought in WBC, and also Yushin Okami, beat Mr. Thunder Okami. Those two are the head coaches who runs that gym. And because, just so you know, those two has been under their monthly payroll for the past almost 5-10 years. They are very, very close with LDH. And Exfights is very good looking, a fancy gym. because
they have a full cage, don't they? It looks like a really nice gym.
Right. It's not that big, but still, because it's a Tokyo standard, because they're in good locations and they have their amateur shows and stuff like that. And again, I'm gonna say over and over, it's LDH is a huge entertainment company, so it's like having a big time corporation backing you up. So I'm telling you this, and they're seriously into this MMA business. So I would predict within 3-4 years they're going to be producing top Japanese fighters.
Yeah,
I really think so. Right. And now, so let's talk about this. Since we talked about this in America, there'll be like Japanese fighter losing, blah blah blah. Now, Mr. Kai Asakura is in Las Vegas right now.
He is, yeah.
Joined up with Mr. Manel Cape and trained at Syndicate, and stuff like that. Unfortunately, Cape got tested positive, so he couldn't, fight on this past weekend. But here's a very interesting thing. I forgot to share this. Asakura, there was an article about on Yahoo Japan that Asakura went to US and trained. On the first day, he was at the Syndicate, and he saw this real, tough guy training on that like open mat sparring session. And he was a Marab from Longa and Wyman, which is a teammates of Uruka and Naoki. But what really kind of annoyed me was that, according to Kai Asakura, he didn't know who that guy was.
I mean, you might find it annoying, but I found that a lot of Japanese fighters kind of live in their own bubble.
Yeah, but you understand, Asakura clearly stated in the past, there's not that big a difference between UFC bantamweights and RIZIN bantamweights. Right. Like he has been studying UFC fighters. Now, if he has been watching UFC bantamweights, there's no way he doesn't know who Merab is.
I mean, you and I have spoken to a lot of Japanese fighters, and the impression I get is that it's like a very cursory. They don't really look at the UFC that much.
No.
And I mean, it's clear because Kai's comments in his YouTube videos now have been about how strong these guys are that he's training with and how he thinks they're actually at a different level.
Yeah.
They're much higher level. And he actually, in the videos, he seems much more happy with the US training environment than the Japan training environment. He had some interesting comments. He was saying that Japan has like this real strict kind of training atmosphere, where the US has this more laid back, but seems like everyone's actually more effective training.
Yeah, it's a simply put quality over quantity.
Right.
And I'm telling you right now, like I used to be a competitive swimmer. Okay, I got an athletic scholarship. I went to 4-year college, Division I. I swam, but I tell you, back then on my era, it was the same thing. It was in Japanese training was quantity over quality. But that changed it, and that's when Japanese swimming became very good, and right now it's a world class, right? But that's what Japanese MMA has to realize. It's still there. Some of the coaches' mind is still like from the 70s.
Well, I just remember what Mizuki said when she talked about the differences. She said in the Japan, she was training like 10, 11 hours a day.
Well, exactly. That's extreme. But yeah, they were training, right, 10, 11 hours a day.
The quality of the training in the U.S. is just so much higher level.
Right. But here's what is interesting thing. For example, now Naoki's back in the States. Now he has his new, strength and conditioning coach. So they do like a 1-hour session twice a week, right? So, a couple times. So I had a talk with Naoki, so how was it? And blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, it's really good because it's a quality thing and you can do a lot of things on a short period of time. So I'm like, oh, all right. What about your SNS, strength and, conditioning coach in Japan? How long was his session? Well, he was saying, it was like 3 hours, sometimes 4. I'm like, do you work out for 3-4 hours? But no, this coach explains logics behind it and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's a lot of discussions and talking involved in this 3-4 hour session. So that never happens in States, No.
Well, also, yeah, but it's interesting because Vector Kai, his visit's getting a lot of attention. All because of his YouTube channel. He's making a lot of YouTube videos there. And he went there. I think he's actually one of the people with him is a Deep Jewels Round girl.
Yeah, I saw that. I wasn't really getting into that. He has some Deep Jewels Round girl as a translator. There's another jiu-jitsu guy translator. There's another. He's one of the gang who's probably there for shooting or helping him out, whatever that is. I'm doing this. It's okay. I feel it's a generation gap thing. If this was 20, 30 years ago, if you're going to go challenge America, you're coming, you show up alone. You don't tag along with your translator and your buddies.
Oh, are you talking about like
as a weak move? You know, it's a win.
Like days like when like Genki Sudo or like Megumi Fuji would just like go to California alone and train.
Exactly. This is the era that I came from. The era where like some Japanese guy who wanted to open a Japanese sushi restaurant and showed up to America with just $500 in pocket. They didn't speak any English, that kind of stuff. You know, who wanted to be a dancer, artist. I came from that era. Now, today's this younger generation of Japanese boys, not only about the fighters, I'm talking about the other people too. Like when I ask them, you want to come to States and study, you know, they're always like, oh, I'm so concerned about not being able to speak English. I don't know the culture well. Maybe I should take my brother who's been to America with me. I'm like, come on, you know, let's just dive in by yourself. Now, I also have a couple of Japanese fighters who always says like, oh, I want to come to the States and train. So I'm like, so how long? And some fighters say like 2 weeks. What the hell are you going to do in 2 weeks?
You know? That's what I want to say. My issue is that he's going there for a month.
Just a month.
And I'm like, what is that going to do for you? Like, if I'd rather you stay there longer, because I think now that he's done it, got a bunch of attention, Mikuru is also going to the U.S. to train.
That's what he said. Right.
And Mikuru said he's going to go to Hawaii and train with Max Holloway's gym.
Right, yeah. And he's asking guys to change that kind of stuff, right?
But I wish that it would be more of a serious training, because it seems it's more like a YouTube sightseeing trip.
It is, exactly. So that's what I was just going to say. I mean, fine. They have the money. They have a business. They want to execute. That's fine. You know, they could do that. But it's like, for example, YouTube staff doesn't have to be there all 3 months. The fighter can be there 3 months and do the real training, you know? Yeah. Because, you know, think about it. Even though, let's say on the other end, if the American guy wants to come and train, let's say judo in Japan, or learn some Japanese kabuki, whatever that is, you don't just show up for 2 weeks or 1 month. And do you think master will recognize you? You know, think, oh, you're a good guy. We will help you out as a team. You know, it's not gonna happen. You know.
Well, it was kind of funny though, because when we were watching the Bellator fights, we were watching the Horiguchi fight, and I was like, "That's Patchy Mix. He trains where Kai is training right now." Like, I'm not trying to explain it all in Japanese terms, so it was kind of fun. But yeah,
and also here's the but on the other side of the coin, I have to say that it's good that Kai actually finally came to States. It's a first step, and I hope he realized that next time, all right, I better come alone. You know,
well, I'd like to see him do a whole fight camp there.
Yeah, exactly. Fight camp, or like even like if he has the money, he should go a couple places and find the coach that's suitable for what he's looking for.
Right, because it's clear that the reason he's in Vegas is because he knows Manel Cape. Because I was actually interested when I first heard that Mikuru was going to Hawaii to train at Max Holloway's gym. I was like, that's kind of an interesting choice. Max Holloway is a very high-level fighter. It's kind of a smaller gym. Maybe he could get some good attention. Whereas Syndicate and Extreme Couture, while both very good gyms, they get a lot of traffic.
Right.
How much attention Kai actually gets there, or if he's just rolling with Manel Cape.
Just rolling around, right? Of course. Yeah. But that's fine, though. It's a first step, you know.
Right.
But, you know, here's what it is. Like, it's like the same as when you go a language school, English language school in States. There's a clear-cut difference between the Japanese students who really study and try to associate with the local people versus the Japanese student who just gets together with only Japanese, end up hanging out with only Japanese people, you know. So, of course, they end up not really learning English well. You know, it's like the same kind of theory. You got to dive in there, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I expect this to kind of start like a whole storm because he's so popular. I imagine now all these Japanese fighters are wanting to do the same thing. So it'll be interesting to see who else goes to try to train in the U.S.
Yeah, you know, I can't reveal this right now, but there's plans of more than a handful of very interesting known fighters from Japan are actually all coming to the States to train. Yeah, I cannot name names here, but you'll be surprised. But the places they go to, you know, some fighters already have a very good backing, you know, so they got money to spend. So some fighters are going a couple places to test it out and stuff like that. So from now on, I think we will see more Japanese fighter training in America.
Be interesting, and I'd love to see it.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into, because I know you have to go today, but let's talk about RIZIN 35 and Trigger. Result. Yeah. I mean,
I love the venue. Just to open it up, it was a cool venue. It was built for the Tokyo Olympics, and I think it was like I think it's essentially like a it has like it can be like 4 basketball courts at once, but unlike Saitama Super Arena, you feel a lot closer to the action. So even the upper seats were like very close. So it's kind of a cool venue. I like it a lot.
So it's a good venue to watch those events or like a fight event.
Yes, especially for like a Trigger show, because I think it seats 10,000, and I think the Trigger show is still close to 7,000 seats.
Right.
I mean, it was good numbers.
Right. So let's talk about Trigger show first. My impression is that they finally started bringing in fighters from outside Japan.
Yes.
And they accepted, a couple of guys who's obviously just to fairly match against the Japanese guys. All these top guys, in terms of top match makes, I think all Japanese fighters lost.
Well, I mean, in the main events, yeah. Well, not the main events, no, but I mean, Yachi was always. I mean, Gustavo murdered him in the first fight, and Gustavo murdered him in the second fight.
Right.
It wasn't a lot of difference. So
yeah,
I think that was the Kunamoto fight. Luke being gone was a big disappointment. That was the fight I was actually kind of looking forward to.
I think almost all fans were looking forward to see this fight more than anything else in this show. But of course, just so you know, the Kintaro, he really had a real bad back, and this happened before and he had to cancel one pancreas fight in the past. So I think his lower back problem is sort of like a habit right now.
Yeah, it's like a reoccurring injury, but at least Kuramoto is rescheduled for the upcoming Landmark show. So
actually, right now, since I'm a Kuramoto's manager and since I can reveal it, that the moment I got the call to say that Kintaro can fight, I think it was a day before weigh-ins. That point, I knew it. There was a May 5th Landmark show, so immediately I asked for a fight in that show. And actually, before even the fight day, I already had 3 candidates for us to choose from.
Oh, nice.
So RIZIN was very quick to try to accommodate everything else. And I'm gonna tell you this one more thing that a lot of people wonder about that, because let's say if this kind of thing happens, if this happens before the weigh-ins, most of the promotions they don't get paid.
Right.
You don't pay a show purse. If you go to the weigh-in day, maybe they'll pay a show purse. Show money. The UFC pays only $10,000 now instead of an entire show money in a case like that. Now, in terms of RIZIN, a lot of fans realize that. Hold on. A lot of fans forgets that the Japanese fighters sells a lot of tickets.
Right.
So now, in Kuramoto's case, he sold over $10,000 tickets. Now, most of the people, if they bought a ticket, if the Kuramoto is not fighting, they're like, "Oh, I'm not."
Oh, you mean the pay-per-view tickets?
Not the pay-per-view tickets. I'm talking about besides that, because like Japanese fighter takes the orders personally.
You say you mean 1,000?
Yeah, 10,000.
But the venue only seats 10,000. I'm kind of
$10,000 worth of seats. I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you meant sold like 10,000.
No. So which means like most of the time when that happens, most of the time Japanese fighters has to swallow that loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, meaning like most of the people that doesn't want to show up, they want to cancel the tickets, but they're not getting their money back. So you got to pay money back from your own pocket. But which is very unreasonable, but that didn't happen to him either,
Oh, good.
So I think RIZIN did very well in terms of like accommodating Kuramoto on a situation like that. So but anyway, so let's talk about the other fights and Majima against Kanehara.
This one, that Shrek Taka Kenshin fight. That fight got everyone fired up.
This is the only fight I actually didn't see yet, to tell the truth. For some reason,
Japanese fans went nuts for this fight. They loved it.
They loved it, huh?
Seeing Shrek finish Taka Kenshin with soccer kicks is everything everybody wanted.
Why is that, though? Because Shrek was very popular, or just that people didn't like Taka Kenshin?
My personal opinion, I think Taka Kenshin kind of has like a somewhat arrogant attitude. And he was kind of like a lot of bravado, and I think people like seeing the old man just take him out.
Yeah, that's true. Shrek is a nice guy. He's a character. He does pro wrestling too.
people are making a lot of jokes about the police officer taking down the drug dealer because he had the marijuana charges.
That's true. That's true. And I think back then when he was a policeman, he was more in charge of taking care of delinquent boys on the street. Yeah.
And people were laughing because after he beat him, he was like crying. He was like, "It was only your first fight. You'll be fine." So he was very nice to Taka Kenshin afterwards. But
that's
I like the character. And I was laughing because now Shrek is probably the best heavyweight in RIZIN. I mean, he beat Shibasai, he beat Taka Kenshin, so 48 years old, he's looking pretty good.
Yeah, well, I mean, but again, that's actually a low-level competition, right? I mean,
it was interesting because the thought I had about this was Sidario. They rolled out the training wheels for him. They let him fight pro wrestlers. They let him fight a really old Minuaman. And Taka Kenshin, they gave him Shrek is old. Shrek has his limitations, but Shrek is an MMA fighter. And they gave him an MMA fighter in his very first fight. So it'll be interesting to see the difference in how they develop Taka Kenshin over his brother, Sidario. Yeah.
So this is going to be very and also I have to mention that my client Majima, who lost to Kanehara. I'm going to tell you this, that even remember the fights like Mr. Tsunabe versus Yoshiro Maeda in Okinawa, RIZIN Okinawa show? Those guys, even like Kanehara, those guys are from like 10 years ago, right?
Right.
They're making a comeback and they're still beating up top Japanese young fighters from younger generations. This is a clear sign. I think the total level of a competition level of Japanese fighters are much lower than 10 years ago.
Well, yeah, that's kind of been the way in Japan for a while now, is you have these older veterans who are always aging, but the younger generation has never really been able to beat.
No.
But right now, I think you're starting to see some people break through. I think we're on the edge of a new generation kind of taking over.
I hope so. I really hope so. But who are you thinking? Except Seika Izawa, finally, right?
I'm thinking mainly of the women's divisions. In the women's divisions, it looks like there's some good contenders coming up. I mean, not just Izawa, but in the men's generation also, there's some young guys that are starting to pop up. The issue is, are they going to be as good as a lot of the veterans? It'll be interesting to see.
Right, exactly. Right. So, I mean, let's look at the results from the RIZIN 35. I mean, was it any surprises or anything? You thought that we were very good looking up and coming talent? Anything?
RIZIN 35, let's just take a second to realize I was so happy. This felt like the first card. Like, in my mind, this was even better than the Tokyo Dome, just because it felt like it had a lot of foreign talent on it. It felt like pre-pandemic RIZIN. It was great. There was a great VTR to open the show. It was essentially sold out. Just felt great. And a lot of great fights. I mean, there was a couple of, I thought the Ushiku Saito fight was kind of weird and it was a strange fight all in all. But I mean, Souza looked amazing. Izawa.
Exactly. I want to talk about that. I mean, after this fight show, Sakakura even said, I think Souza can beat Pitbull, which is a Bellator lightweight, featherweight champion. Do you think Souza's up there?
Well, my personal bias, I love specialists. I like watching specialists fight. And if he gets anybody to the ground, I think he can beat them on the ground.
Yeah, of course. He's very good.
So can he get them to the ground, and can he survive long enough on his feet? Right. But he's made a lot of advancements. His striking didn't look awful in this fight.
But what about him against the top
grapplers
in the States, like a real top guns?
I'm sorry?
What about Souza against like a real top grapplers in a world-class grapplers in MMA,
I mean, they should book it. They should find some high-level grappler and bring him over for him to fight. I'd like to see that.
Right, because he hasn't really faced somebody like that yet, right? In a way.
It's possible. I mean, there's no denying, though, that because Johnny Case is a legitimate fighter.
Oh, yeah, he is, right.
And so there's no denying that his grappling is very good. I I mean, I would like to see him fight another talented grappler. So if they can find someone to bring over, that'd be great. Or over in Bellator.
Yeah, I know. I wish they can do that. Or like even him against Patrick Mix, even though it's a different weight class, it might even make sense, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, bring him up. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good idea, but somebody like that, in his own weight class.
Right.
Yeah. Now, yeah, exactly. Now, what do you think about this Mishiko Saito fight?
I thought it was a strange fight because I thought Saito was winning all of the fight except for 2 seconds. And one of those seconds was him getting blasted by a high kick that almost knocked him out. And the other was him getting dropped by a punch. So it's like a weird fight to score where, yeah, he was winning most of the fight, but he legitimately almost got finished twice. So it was kind of a weird fight to score.
Right. Now, I mean, do you think this really was the fight to decide the best featherweights in Japan?
No, I mean, everyone's joking. I mean, at this rate, it seems like because they announced that Clever Koike is fighting Hagiwara in his next fight. I mean, at this rate, Koike is going to be fighting for the title in 2030. It's like, why Koike is clearly the champion. Well, why is he not fighting for the title?
I'm telling you, I think Clever is going to beat Kyohei, I think. And they have to match Mishiko against Clever Koike. It has to be, right?
I mean, to throw an old-timey reference out, this reminds me of when Tito Ortiz was the champion and Chuck Liddell was knocking out everyone. And I was just like, oh, so it's like the champion has this protector who's also in the division defeating all of the up-and-comers while the champion just sits on the top. Like, Ushiku and Saito, I mean, it's weird to me. Saito's coming off of a loss, coming off 2 losses. He gets this fight. And it was just a weird booking. It almost seemed like RIZIN was trying to erase the first fight. They were like hoping that Saito would win because Saito is popular. Saito has fans. I don't know why, but he has fans. He gets a lot of attention. And so I think they wanted him to be champion so they could act like the first fight never happened. So then they could start the Grand Prix.
Yeah, but here's what it is. I think there's not going to be any Grand Prix for featherweight this year because obviously Mikuru will not go through the Grand Prix. And, some top guys like Horie is still injured, and in my book, I mean, I'm so sorry to say this to Mr. Ushiku, but to me, a guy like Clever, obviously, or Keramov, or Horie, or Kamihara, even the guy like Majima probably will beat him,
It was such a weird fight because in both his fights against Saito, he was like losing, and then just like he did one thing to like. It's hard to score around for a guy or to have a guy win. Like when they had RIZIN rules, it's like who got closest to finishing the fight. And Ushiku like clearly was a hair away from knocking Saito out.
Right. So that fight, he won that fair and square, I think, under the especially the RIZIN rule. I mean, judging criteria.
Right.
But it's just, I mean, to me, I mean, featherweight has more better fighters than him. And I think, so they should try to get Clever into the title fight, at least give him the title and start the pyramid from there.
Maybe they're just trying to have a Japanese champion for as long as possible. They're just like trying to hold Koike off so they can have a Japanese champion.
No, but here's my assumption from these 2-day shows in Tokyo. I think in terms of like survival league for the Japanese fighter began because of during the pandemic. I would have to say this to some of the Japanese fighters who usually doesn't get a call from RIZIN, got a call from RIZIN. And they all got to fight in big stage. But now the fighters from outside Japan are coming in. So they're really like going through this survival tournament almost. If you lose, you're going to get cut, ended up in a smaller show, like even Deep or Pancras or Shuto. And the beginning of that, to me, is Kyohei against Clever. Because I'm going to say this. I'm no insult to Kyohei. He's a good fighter and stuff, but he has 0 ground game. So when that fight hits the ground, he's just no chance. If I were odds maker at the casino, I won't even open the bet on this fight. I won't.
All he has is just a chance of knocking Koike out, but he puts the ground over almost immediately.
Exactly. And of course, sure, anything could happen, but him landing that solid punch to Koike to knock that guy out to finish everything, it's very, very slim chance.
Right.
Right.
Now,
so
is Ren Hiramoto going to be sitting front row to watch this as well?
I don't know. So yeah, I mean, so like featherweight, I think not only the featherweight, but the other weights, but especially the featherweight, I think they don't have a lot of Japanese fighters falling from the race and ended up in deep pancreas shuto by end of this year.
Well, they might go down to the trigger shows or the landmark shows.
And partly because I don't think they're doing Grand Prix at the featherweight, so they don't need that much fighters, you know? Yeah. On the other side of the coin, to answer Daniel's comment, I think the Grand Prix is going to happen at 125 this year, flyweight.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be 8, whatever, but I think that's the talent they try to build, you know?
Yeah.
Because they need a new star right there. So I think Grand Prix creates the star too, right?
And after her fight, in between tiers, Seika Izawa asked for at super atomweight tournament. What do you think of the odds of that?
But is there enough talent there, right? I mean, I guess so right now, because outside Japan, they could bring in fighters now. So they could bring in 4 non-Japanese and maybe Izawa and 3 other Japanese. You know,
so my idea was that you don't even have to have Seika Izawa in it. You just bring a couple of Deep Jewels fighters, then bring over Siwoo Park. Count her as a Korean fighter, even though she lives in Japan, and then just bring over maybe a girl from Invicta, maybe a girl from Bellator or something. And I think it'd be easy to put a tournament together.
You know, I'm telling you this. I think the fight to make right at this point against Izawa has to be the girl like Invicta champion Jessica Deruboni. All right.
Yeah, but Jessica said she's not interested in it.
We'll see. You know.
Because I think Jessica said in an interview she's not interested in fighting at RIZIN at all.
Actually, that's not really true at all.
I know you manage her. I know you manage her, but I saw an interview where she said she had no interest in fighting for RIZIN.
And I don't know if she really. Here's the bottom line: if she cannot get a call from the UFC for the strawweight, there's no atomweight. Of course, her goal is to get to the UFC. So if she gets the call even for 115, she'll probably take that. You know. But if she's not getting that, then her choice is to either keep fighting for Invicta, which is not in a good relationship with UFC anymore. So she's got to fight out the contract to get to the UFC, you know?
Right.
Yeah, which means it's not that short, you know what I mean? So if she gets the chance to earn much bigger money by winning Grand Prix or something like that in RIZIN, she might go for that, you know?
Right. Plus, I mean, my general impression is that Invicta doesn't have the same clout that it had like 4 or 5 years ago. That they seem to be struggling a little bit with their new deal.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to see what happens. But I was kind of shocked she made those comments because I thought RIZIN would offer a bigger payday and a way bigger visibility. But it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, I mean, if it's the Grand Prix, the winning purse has to be way much bigger than what Invicta pays, obviously, right? If they pay 100K or something like that, the Grand Prix winner. But I'm telling you this thing, I love Jessica Deruboni because she's such a hard worker. And let me tell you this, she was in the States, right, training with Jessica, Kanako, and everybody else, you know, twice a day, right? Of course, she has the proper visa from Invicta, you know. I can't review her purse, but she's making okay money. Now, even though she was there training twice a day in Vegas, she had like 3 jobs. She worked as a babysitter, cleaning room, all kinds of, such a hard worker. Now, she went back to Brazil and was supposed to come back to the States. Guess what happens? Her luggage gets stolen with her passport's visa. So she's stuck in Brazil to go through another visa process to try to get her visa back. So I feel so sorry for her, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but she's such a hardworking girl. And if she can get the more opportunities, more like fights more often in Invicta, maybe, you know, RIZIN could be another choice. And I think Shannon is always open-minded about something like that. You know, she's never stopped the fighters from a bigger, a better opportunity, even though it's outside Invicta. You know.
So, here are my thoughts about the future. So, Izawa Seki is managed by Deep Jewels, and so I think it's not a coincidence that she asked for a super atomweight tournament as her post-fight speech. I imagine it was something that she kind of seems like she remembered to say. So my idea would be that Deep Jewels asked her to mention something about a super atomweight tournament because Deep Jewels has been kind of creating the environment because they had all of their atomweights and strawweights drop to or move up to super atomweight. And they've been holding these super atomweight fights. So they're kind of creating an environment 4 potential fighters for super atomweight.
Yeah, and, I mean, here's what it is. I think many fans say like, oh, Izawa is great. I wish she could go to UFC right now, kind of stuff. But that's just never going to happen. I mean, you have to understand, she just became a champion. So she has to stay there, There's a champions clause. And of course, they have to build that division around her and stuff like that. And I'll tell you this, like you say, she's with the contract. She has a contract with Deep Jewels. And I know how long that contract is. It's not short, So she has to fulfill those obligations. And, if she does maybe next year or 2, she wins the Grand Prix. Maybe she established the division. She did everything. She beats everybody. Then maybe RIZIN and Deep Jewel says, okay, maybe it's time for her to go to UFC,
Yeah.
So it's going to be another couple of years, I think, at least.
So Deep Jewels is holding an event on May 8th with an atomweight title fight between Saito Oshima and Moetti Suda. And Saito Oshima is already very popular amongst RIZIN. Yes. And Moetti Suda is the type of fighter that RIZIN likes. They love the just out of high school kind of Asakura vibe. Sure. So I feel like the winner of that fight would be a shoe-in for a potential tournament. They have Miki Matono, who's just young Ayaka Hamasaki. And then I spoke to Karen in Pancrase, who's also very popular, and she said she could easily drop down to 49 kilo.
Oh, easy.
Tournament, you could get Deep Jewels, you get Pancrase. You could even get some girls from Shuto to get like a representative from each of the Japanese organizations. Right. So I think,
and they need a couple more from outside Japan too, right? So like I say, if the Deraboni happens, or like a couple other top girls out there, it would be an interesting Grand Prix. Right, and also, I mean, there's also other. I mean, Rinya could take part if she wanted to. She's also there, and it's her last run too, right? So it kind of makes sense.
But she's going to want to win that tournament, especially since, I mean, I don't want to see Ayaka Hamasaki's a legend, but I don't want to see her in the tournament. I'd like to see her have some fight some international talent and just go out on her legend status. She doesn't need to be down there grinding it out with the young guns.
I haven't talked to Ayaka yet, but I have a feeling she might even call her a quit. She was thinking about juggling idea of when she was gonna, walk out of the game.
It seemed like she was wanting to pass the torch off, but I think losing to Oshima, it seemed to be like, she has this idea of not yet, it's too soon. But if she does want to call it quits, I'd like to see them give her a good retirement fight and send her off in a proper fashion. And we have a comment.
I'm such a manager here, right? But if she wants to walk out with a good fight, she should fight Jessica Aguilar.
Well, that'd be an interesting fight because Jessica Aguilar also has the history with Megumi Fuji.
Exactly. And also remember, Jessica's fight was confirmed in Japan, but it got canceled because of that disaster, remember?
Yeah.
So Japan owes her a fight.
But yeah, so Hamasaki's still good. I mean, just because she lost to Seiki Izawa doesn't mean that Hamasaki's washed up. I think she's still a very good fighter. Still has a couple fights left in her I'd like to see. And but yeah, I'm just trying to say that the environment is ripe right now for a super atomweight tournament. Plus, I said last year, like this year, the women in Japan especially, people like Saito Oshima, Miki Matono, especially, and then maybe Moetti Suda, this new younger fighters coming up who have extensive martial arts backgrounds, that we should bring in some international talent to really showcase that. The only issue is that a ton of these girls train at AACC. So it might wind up with some teammates fighting each other, but that's inevitable, and let it happen.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of female MMA in Japan, almost everybody trains at AACC. It's partly because it's just not enough training partners, right, for females. So, I mean, that's the little difficulty there. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and right now, obviously, they can bring in fighters from outside Japan. So, female talents out there. So it kind of makes sense to do that,
The last tournament was so cool. I mean, that one girl that's in the UFC now, the Brazilian girl, she looked awesome in RIZIN. Alyssa Garcia was a lot of fun. Kira Bantara. So, I mean, they found good talent before. They can do it again.
Yeah, exactly. I always said this publicly many times that matchmaker, in terms of a matchmaker's job, if you're a UFC, it's totally different from the other promotions, right? Because you always have to go dig in and try to find the talent suitable for the fights, convince them to not sign with the UFC and sign with us, blah, blah, blah. A lot of work. In that sense, I think Shingo is doing a terrific job. I mean, he finds very good opponents.
Yeah. It's great. No, it was great. And let's just, I have to leave. I have a meeting at 9.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but too bad. Yeah. But I
want to mention this, though. The crowd went nuts for the TK fight. When Kosaka knocked out Ueda, the crowd went absolutely nuts. I mean, you could not ask for a more perfect finish to a career. I mean, that guy has been fighting almost as long as the UFC has been around.
Right.
And it's knocked out the Shotokan Karate World Champion. So hats off to him. I mean, everybody.
Top guys in the record, right? And he was the very first Japanese so-called quote-unquote regular in the UFC.
I mean, I remember watching him fight Boss Rutan when I was like in middle school. So I mean,
you know what? I mean, do you remember that's the fight that if he went for the ground in the last round, he would have won that fight. But he decided to go and strike against Boss and gets knocked out. It's a Japanese kind of thing.
Oh yeah, it was crazy.
And of course, he beat Timo, which put him on the map. Like, TK Kosaka is a legend. I tell you this, I wrote this on Twitter, but every time TK comes to UFC, Dana White, he comes to TK and grabs TKs and he tells all his staff and everybody else, well, this guy's a legend. He's a TK. Yeah. If you need tickets anytime, kind of stuff, So high respect.
Worth it. Yeah. I'm glad he gets that treatment because he deserves it. And
he deserves it. Yeah, he deserves it.
Yeah, one of the comments, Tamura was in attendance. There's a couple of those old fighters there in attendance. And who's the guy that's married to Koike, the old RIZIN?
Yeah,
he was there as well. I mean, all these guys were there to watch him send him off. So very emotional moment.
And everybody else, right?
Yeah, but also,
just so you know, my nephew goes to TK's gym for the wrestling class. So
Is that alive, or does he have another separate school for his wrestling?
No, it's alive. My both nephews goes there, and they made this cute little special congratulation card to TK and gave to him.
Oh, wonderful! Yeah. And he's also helping train Taka Kenshin now, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. No, TK is a great trainer too. So he trained Horie, also Kikuno, which is UFC veteran. So.
And he helped train Hioki. Hioki is one of the best Japanese fighters to ever fight in the UFC. So
that's true, right? So, yeah, I mean, 52 years old, it's amazing,
Yeah. But I'd also like to point out, it seems like there's like a rush to get these events in before the match.
Oh yeah.
So Deep is holding a bunch of events on May 8th. Including the finals in the semifinals and finals to their flyweight tournament with Rinya and Shizuka Sugiyama. Pancrase has an event this Friday where I will be doing the commentary with Guy.
Right. Yeah, we got to mention this that Charlie is going to make a commentary debut, right?
Yes. So I went to the last Pancrase event with Stu Fulton and Guy, and my one fear is like, can I talk about this? Because for 7 hours, they talk for so long. It looks like a rough gig, but it looks like so much fun. And I'm excited. And Yuki Kondo is fighting. So, I mean, I get to watch a legend fight. So, and Issei Tamura is fighting. So, I get a lot of, and not just veterans. I'm particularly interested. Rei Tsuraya is fighting, who is the son of Ogikubo's coach. So, there's some exciting talent fighting. The main event is a lot of fun. Couple RIZIN veterans, so it should be a lot of fun.
So, you mentioned is the main event Yusaku Kinoshita against Murahama. I mean,
yes, let me pull it up. I was studying last night. I get confused because this Pancrase has the post limbs. They always have a bunch of fights after the main event, but I believe the main event is Iwamoto versus Nakanishi.
Oh, okay. But there's a welterweight named Yusaku Kinoshita, I believe he's 21 years old, who lost in RIZIN for DQ, but he was dominating the fight. I think he's a very good-looking talent in welterweight. So
I was actually reviewing him last night, and I laughed because I'm like, oh, I remembered that because That was the fight where Shinya Aoki complained and got the results overturned or something. It was a stupid result. But, no. Plus, so that fight aside, he's 4-0. All of his fights are win by finishes, 2 submissions, 2 KOs. And it's fun to see because these Pancrase cards, these deep cards, especially Pancrase, they have some old veterans on them, but these young guys, they have these young guys on them that give me hope. And it's fun to see where they could possibly go.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't notice that already Mr. Fukui took over the operations of Pancrase, so Sakai-san is not doing much. And
right, I actually spoke to him at the last show, and he speaks fluent English.
Yeah, and he ran a security company who used to do the security for Akira Maeda's show, so he's pretty close to Akira Maeda too.
Oh, that's interesting. We actually talked about Maeda for a little bit because Maeda was there.
Yeah, you were, right? So that's good. So he's got a good manager,
Yeah, and he knows what he's doing. I mean, every time I go to a Pancrase show, I'm impressed because they run a very tight ship, very high production value. They do cool venues. And now that the pandemic is kind of wrapping up, I expect to see Pancrase kind of launch off. And I'm excited to see where they go.
Right. Yeah. Great. All right. So I got to let you go. You got a meeting in 4 minutes.
I do.
Okay.
But as somebody mentioned earlier in the comments, we could have talked for 3 hours. Japanese MMA is kind of funny. 1 month you'll have like 20 events, and the next month there'll be none.
Yeah. Exactly.
Could have gone on forever and ever.
But we will see a lot of events in July. Watch after the match. It's going to be pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah. Plus, we have to talk about the match. We should bring somebody on who knows more about kickboxing than us because it sounds like it's a K1 versus Rise dream, like fights that were never going to happen or happening. It's crazy. Plus, just to tease it, they did the lottery ticket for the sales for the match, and I heard 80,000 people applied for tickets in the lottery. So I applied. Didn't get it. My wife applied, didn't get it. Her friends applied, didn't get it. Another friend applied, didn't get it. So 80,000 people in the initial lottery. That's nuts.
That is.
So I think this fight is going to be absolutely huge.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. Well, but I'm going to mention this, but my favorite Mr. Eikichi Yazawa's concert, a lot of people apply. It's way over the 100K. Kind of stuff.
I know.
Anyway, so
legend like that.
I gotta let you go.
All right.
But so we'll see you in 2
day.
weeks. Yeah, have a good day.
Yes, see you in 2 weeks.
We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.